This is BDV World. I am Syed Shabahat Ali, and you are watching Fault Lines. While many events have taken place in the world this week which require the attention and discussion in this program, first and foremost is the attack on Israel by Hamas. According to the official reports, Hamas has launched an attack through rockets and also entered some troops on ground in Israel, capturing 35 of Israeli civilians as hostages. That's what the international media is saying. Israel has also announced a response to it, which they call Iron Sword operation, that involves attack on the Hamas targets or in the city of Gaza through air, ground forces, as well as through the naval forces. Israel's defense minister has stated this to be a grave mistake by Hamas. To talk about this, I have requested Ahmed Zaki, a leading expert from Middle East, who was joining us from Somaliland. We asked him what exactly has happened on ground, and that is what he said.
As you know that the Palestinian and Israeli war is not the first time that they go against each other. But what's new is today is that the offensive have been started by the Hamas organization, and they call it the operation that we are going to liberate our area which have been occupied by Israel earlier. They started with throwing the rockets of more than thousands of rockets in less than 20 minutes, which caused a huge damage, as the social media and the international media have already reported, as you know that. As we know that this is the first operation since a decade that the Palestinian side have started the offensive and somehow showed some sort of a progress against Israel. The Israeli, in response, they said that we are going to go for full-scale war, that they said Israel at a war, and that shows that the Israelis are now have no other option other than using the full-scale war. The support and the support they have been getting from the Western world is that the UK, France, and Italy they 100% unconditionally they supported in Israel, and they said that the Palestinian group Hamas, which attacked the Israel the civilian area of Israel, they condemn and they said we are with the support of Israel. On the other side, brother, that the issue is going to make it more clear that the normalization process of Arab countries, which have been led by the American government to make it very close to Saudi Arabia and Israel, is going to be affected by this war. And Arab countries should have to be standing in a clear position that they are going to go against the Palestinian, or they are going to support Palestine. There will be no between the two lines, and this war is going to be the clear boundaries war between Israel and Palestine. This is the first time we have seen that the Palestinians have started the operation, make some success in the early stage, and that shows the Israeli intelligence failure, which have been propagated by the American media and Western media, especially when they are discussing about the operations that they have been conducting for the last 2 decades in Arab countries.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was the very tragic state of affairs in Palestine, and the response from Israel is certainly going to cause more casualties and more losses of the people of Palestine. That is precisely why Pakistan has been requesting the international community to sort out the issue between Israel and Palestine in a peaceful manner. Unfortunately, no strict action has been taken by the international community as yet. Second important subject or topic of today's program is the 5 months of war in Sudan. Now, despite the fact that there have been 5 months of complete war between the two sides in Sudan, that is the official military versus the official paramilitary forces, we still do not see any clear winners. Not only the two sides have tried to run over each other militarily, but also many diplomatic activities, many diplomatic channels have been deployed by the two sides. But unfortunately, we have not seen any results or any clear results so far. Rather, the situation has gone from bad to worse, because there are now reports of increased sexual violence used as a weapon of war against the women who are claiming that most of the offenders are from the RSF sides. Also, that more than 416,000 refugees have entered the neighboring country of Chad, and Chad's officials are saying they're expecting another 600,000 refugees to enter in Chad by December. It's very important to understand this, that this is not one conflict between RSF and military, but also there is an ongoing conflict in some other part of the country. To talk about this, we have invited Dr. Rashid Wali Jinjua, who is a leading expert in the Middle Eastern affairs. Dr. Rashid, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Doctor, what is the latest developments with regards to Sudan's fight? It has been quite long since we spoke about the subject in our show.
Yes, the fight is going on in different regions now. It started with Khartoum, and now regions like Kordofan, Blue Nile region, close to the south of Sudan, and also Western Darfur, they are also in the grip of war. And the conflict is more widespread now. Now, we must understand how important Sudan is. This is a country having the third largest population in Africa. It was a very strong and important country with great mineral and resource potential. Before it was divided into South Sudan and the rest of Sudan in 2011. And we had that Darfur crisis also after that. And we know how Western countries and their interests played out, because the South Sudan, because of their religious affinity, their plight was more, resonating with those Western capitals. And that had direct impact on the UN operations and the international peace support efforts that went in. Unfortunately, after this failed democratic transition in 2019, we had a coup. And ever since then, the Transition Sovereignty Council, which was a mishmash of the old power brokers, Lieutenant General Burhan and Hamidi, these factions kept on competing, and a situation came that RSF, which was in fact comprising the musclemen of old Janjaweed militia, which was created by Omar al-Bashir to take Darfur region into control. So they started playing their own politics, and the Sudan armed forces, they also tried to flex their muscles. So this confrontation led to a crisis, and which still continues. And Transition Sovereignty Council, unfortunately, could not, broker a peace, or it could not act as a stable agent for a peaceful transition. As a result, the situation is quite complex. There are rival militias which are fighting, and it's a veritable, witch's brew. Sometimes you lose track of which militia is fighting whom, because there are militias in the south of Sudan, the Rump region, where close to the South Sudan borders, there were certain affiliated tribes which did not, see eye to eye with the rest of the Sudan and wanted to have their kind of autonomy that South Sudan had. Now, we know the rulers like, the leaders like Ilo, and there's another faction, SPLM, Sudan Liberation Army, and their further splinter factions. So they each power broker and each faction is trying to control the territory, and they are fighting with the view to maximize their bargaining position on any future, bargaining table.
Dr. Jinjua, there are many reports about the Darfur crisis, which is going from bad to worse. Apparently, what we have read in the news is that there are some communal violence now taking place. There are some private militia groups now fighting with each other, and that is making matters worse. Tell us more about it.
Now, the crisis is more in Western Darfur now. There are non-Arab tribes and their affiliates which are fighting with the help of RSF and the SAF, which is the Sudanese armed forces. They are trying to wrest control of the region. They had, in fact, after the Darfur peace agreement was signed, taken Darfur within the fold of Sudan. But RSF is now flexing its muscles to, wrest control back from the SAF. And we know that one of the governors, Khamis, he was also killed. He was abducted by rival militias, and he was killed. So this shows you, this gives you a flavor of what the governance situation is. It's a complete vacuum, and there's a humanitarian crisis. Around 10,000 people have died according to certain estimates. The estimates vary, but 10,000 is a figure that most people point their finger at. So it's a region which is still very destabilized, and even the neighboring country Chad, it tried to intervene. Some of the militia members that spilled out into Chad's territory were waylaid and they were arrested also. So it's a matter of concern for Chad also, for the international community also, because Darfur resonates with UN as a conflict which involved the Western countries, and a complete operation had to be done to separate, because the flavor is more communal, because the Janjaweed and the Arab militia that had a religious affiliation which is quite different from that of the non-Arab tribes that are living there. And they have their own economic interests. So those economic interests, those ethnic tensions and economic factors, they're all playing out. And the region is still destabilized, and an active conflict-like situation prevails there.
And just for the sake of understanding, have there been any diplomatic efforts to overcome this crisis in a peaceful manner?
Not only Arab countries, but African Union itself, SYED, Intergovernment Authority of comprising 8 East African countries. They also provided a forum to resolve this crisis. Rather, SYED offered a standby army of Eastern African nations to go and stabilize the situation in Darfur. But obviously that was not accepted by the central government, SAF in Sudan. Saudi Arabia has had brokered. In fact, that Saudi Arabia was the first one to try and find a kind of a safe passage for the refugees, because Sudan hosts 1 million refugees. Very few people know this thing. And they are all from the neighboring countries, stabilized countries like Syria, and Lebanese are also there. There are refugees from Ethiopia there. And all those refugees, they also are facing a humanitarian crisis-like situation, because WHO facilities, World Food Program facilities, they were also attacked there. And second attempt was by this AU and UN combined. And there was an attempt in 2022, December, in which a peace was, brokered. But it could not hold out. And rival factions, they wriggled out of it, and they have recommenced their hostilities.
And it must be a horrifying scenario for the population of Sudan. Tell us, what do we know about the losses that the population is facing at large?
Economy is in a tizzy, because the GDP has plummeted by 20%. And there are certain risks inherent in this continual conflict that whole economy might actually collapse. Because once the GDP is in tailspin, inflation is to the tune of 115%. And it has come down from 246 when it was at its peak. So you can imagine its impact on the livelihoods and the disposable incomes of the population. The country is not being, engaged because of this conflict by IMF and World Bank. They have suspended their engagements. And in fact, there was a humanitarian fund which was earmarked for this region. Out of that, the United Nations has just approved 14% because there is a very unsure, conflict-prone region where over 51 WHO facilities have been attacked. And the warehouses, a World Food Program, they also have been pillaged, so much so that the food stocks which could feed 4 million population have been completely destroyed. So under this state of instability, where pillaging and vandalism is going on, the UN is also reluctant. It doesn't want to go and burn its fingers, despite the fact that the special representative, Mr. Porthos, is very active. And there's a special UN mission, and I think it is called UNATAMIS, which is here for 2 years. It is very actively engaged, and the special representative keeps making various efforts to bring the African Union, the Middle Eastern countries, which are allied to certain factions. We know the UAE's involvement also with the RSF, and we also know Egypt's predisposition towards Sudanese armed forces. So the efforts are afoot, but the situation is quite critical. And the climate change and the droughts, irregular rainfall patterns, and the floods, they have made the situation worse. There were floods last year in 18 of the 20 provinces of Sudan. So you can well imagine the plight once the population is not having anything to eat. There are irregular, rain patterns. Droughts are occurring, and the food stocks are depleting. There's an issue, very serious humanitarian issue, which is unfolding, is that of internally displaced and those people who had to migrate. According to the figures given by IOM, there are 0.8 million people that have left Sudan, and they've gone for the neighboring countries, which are equally destabilized. Countries like Chad, countries like, they're moving into Egypt. And there is another crisis which is going on the Ethiopian eastern frontier of Tigray's, militants. So some of the refugees from Ethiopia, which were already there, they've been caught up into this situation. And this is complicating the mosaic further.
And if I understand you correctly, this is going to further aggravate the hunger crisis in Sudan.
It indeed is, because UN is not having a free hand in operating there. As I just mentioned, that UN facilities are being attacked by the rival militias. They are pillaging, they are looting, and as a result, the people are getting killed, and UN is facing real problems to stabilize the situation and to start with their humanitarian operations. 4 million IDPs, they have been displaced, and 3.3 million are internally displaced. And there are no proper camps, sanitation facilities, food stocks, health facilities, and even education facilities. There have been reports that over 1,200 children in one region close to Darfur have been killed in the crossfire. So if this is the situation, then you can easily understand the humanitarian tragedy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rashid Wali Janjua, for being guest in our show.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with second segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. 50 head of the states have met in the city of Granada, Spain, where European Union was holding its security summit. This was a very critical and a very important meeting, because one of the major agenda items was the expansion of European Union, and also they were quite concerned about the situation unfolding in Ukraine. Not only there is a fear that United States patronage of Ukraine's war might go down, might melt down over a period of time, but also there are inherent problems within the European nations. For example, there are now disputes between Poland and Ukraine. Recently, a news item was read in the newspapers saying that the United Kingdom is now running out of ammunition that it was supplying to Ukraine. Germany's economic crunch is perhaps the worst after the disruption in the gas supply that was being made from Russia, and France is also facing a huge economic turmoil. All of this requires the attention of the European nations. How did the event go? What was the significance of the event? I have invited Dr. Carl Colton-Teller from the University of Akron, who speaks on the subject very frequently. Dr. Carl, I welcome you to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Doctor, what was the significance of this event taking place in Spain?
Well, it's a significant event because it is a very large grouping of European countries that span countries inside the EU, outside of the EU. It's a time for them to get together, and it's particularly important when we consider what's going on in Europe right now, most importantly, the war in Ukraine. And so really at the top of the list of things to think about was, how does Europe respond collectively to the war in Ukraine, given some changes since the last time European countries got together and talked about these things, both within Europe and outside of Europe. And then another issue that's very important is the issue of the expansion potentially of the European Union. So this is something also that got discussed. So this was an important conference. I mean, typically the European political community is not a conference or a summit where really important decisions get made, but in the context of what's going on in the world right now, this was important.
And why has it not been able to address the major conflict in Europe? That is the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh.
Right. And the reason for that, I think, is that, to be honest, the European countries don't have a good response to it. This was a situation that was solved very quickly by Azerbaijan simply taking over Nagorno-Karabakh. The European countries were kind of left flat-footed by it. And they don't have a good response to it. So rather than try to deal with it, they just kind of ignored it.
And why does the illegal migration sit on the top of agenda of European nations? Do we see another inflow of refugees coming from elsewhere? Please let us know if there are any recent developments that we cannot see.
It's not so much that there's a major uptick in illegal immigration into the European space. It's much more that I think politicians are concerned about how this is changing the political landscape within their own countries. The rise of right-wing populist parties now in Europe is pretty significant. And in countries that we really wouldn't expect this to happen, for example, in Germany, the Alternative for Germany party has gained substantial traction on the issue of migration. And so politicians are worried about this because these parties don't just represent an out of the mainstream type of political movement. They could severely disrupt the status quo in Europe, particularly when it comes to European integration, when it comes to cooperation with the United States, when it comes to issues of dealing with Ukraine, dealing with Russia. So there's significant concerns that the migration issue can have spillover effects, that it's not just really about migration, it's about how the migration issue can affect the political landscape.
Now, what are the concerns of European nations with regards to the Ukraine war?
I think that the most concerning aspect of the Ukraine war is that there's no end in sight, that this will be a war of attrition, this will go on for a long time, and there's significant concern that there won't be a political appetite within their countries to continue to aid Ukraine. And one of the things that I think is kept very much at the forefront of thinking about this is that the United States, which has really taken the lead both in terms of the amount of material sent to the Ukrainians, the amount of money that's been sent to the Ukrainians, the political leadership the United States has taken on the issue of aiding Ukrainians, that's all looking very much up in the air now. The United States could move back from that. It's a distinct possibility given political developments in the United States. If that happens, it's entirely possible that the European effort to aid Ukraine then becomes unraveled. And so these are very difficult times, because I think most mainstream European political leaders think if aid for Ukraine is withdrawn or diminished, it doesn't have to be totally withdrawn, simply diminished, the war could go in Russia's favor, and then that opens up a whole can of worms in terms of a new security threat in Europe if Ukraine was to fall. So the longer this war goes on, the worse it is for Europe, the worse it is for the United States, obviously the worse it is for the Ukrainians. But the key thing that I've got my eye on right now is the political fatigue that could happen as a consequence of this war dragging on.
Dr. Kaul, is there a consensus between the two sides of US politics with regards to Ukraine's agenda?
Yeah, so it definitely wouldn't be both of the parties. Although there are voices in both parties that are saying the United States needs to take less of a role in international affairs, particularly in international conflicts. But those voices are much more numerous and louder in the Republican Party than they are in the Democratic Party. The real concern right now for those of us who think that the United States has a vested national security interest in supporting Ukraine is that if you want to refer to it as the intra-party war or civil war, or whatever words you want to use, within the Republican Party could actually lead to aid being curtailed to Ukraine. And this is because of the hardcore populist wing that gravitates towards Trump versus the more mainstream establishment wing of the Republican Party. They're really at loggerheads right now. And that populist wing is starting to see shifts in public opinion in the United States where more and more Americans, particularly less educated Americans, rural Americans, don't understand why aiding Ukraine is in America's national interest. And so they're starting to turn sour on the idea of more money, more material going to Ukraine. And so these politicians, they look at those poll numbers and they say, okay, I can get some traction on this. And they're now becoming more vocal and saying we need to cut aid to Ukraine. It's still a minority within the Republican Party, but it's a very powerful minority. And as you well know, the United States House of Representatives lost its speaker this week because he was essentially ousted by these very hardcore right-wing populist members of his own party. So that small minority has a very strong hand to play and may actually get aid to Ukraine cut or at least severely curtailed in order to elect a speaker who they like.
There was a news item, Dr. Kaul, that I want you to comment on, which says UK's supply to Ukraine is running dry. This means UK would not be able to be a key provision of ammunition to Ukraine. How does it affect Ukraine's war, and how does it paramount the challenges for other European nations?
Well, no European leader that I've seen, at least from a major European country, has said if the United States withdraws its aid or curtails its aid, it reduces the amount of aid, that we're going to do the same thing. But I think everyone knows, it's kind of an open secret, that the political appetite to continue the support for Ukraine will diminish substantially. You know, this is not a particularly popular effort in many of the European countries. You know, take, for example, Germany. In Germany, you have really two currents against support for Ukraine. One comes from the far right and one comes from the far left, which, interestingly enough, have become more powerful in German politics over time. And so both of these wings, if you want to say it, of the kind of mainstream politics in Germany are pressing hard to get the aid to Ukraine stopped and to engage in some kind of peace process. This is what you hear a lot from the opponents, even in the United States, of aid to Ukraine. Well, we should stop fighting. We should press Ukraine into a peace process. There is no peace process that ends this conflict, at least not now. In Russia, what they would see as a viable solution to this, that would be reached by a political process. That that now is not the time to say, oh yeah, we'll cut aid and then we'll get to the peace process. What that would mean is essentially the Ukrainians either collapse militarily or are forced into some kind of major loss of territory that they wouldn't be willing to accept.
But Dr. Call, do you think Russia is going to benefit out of the turmoil that these European nations are facing, and because of the political issues that we have pointed out so far?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Russia is in bad shape as a result of this war, economically, politically, militarily. The bottom line on this, though, is that Russia still has much more military capacity than Ukraine has, and that Russia, if it's a long, drawn-out war of attrition, Russia has the upper hand. And so Ukraine must depend on foreign aid, foreign military aid, foreign economic aid in order to stay in the fight. If it's just the Ukrainians trying to use their own resources, they'll definitely have a very hard time. So Russia knows this, and Russia is playing the long game, and they're waiting out the West, because the West is obviously the principal supporter of Ukraine. And the other thing that Russia's doing is they are playing whatever cards they have with these right-wing populist parties, and in the German case with the left-wing party in particular, the Die Linke, they are using their leverage to try to get these parties to oppose aid to Ukraine and to back away from that effort. So Russia's got some definite leverage. It's got some cards to play that could come out in the end and help it substantially in this conflict.
But Dr. Call, as a student of political science, can I ask you if the long war will favor the invader? Because in all the previous cases, the long war of Iraq, the long war of Afghanistan when USSR was invading, the long stay of United States in Afghanistan, all of these wars, or Vietnam War, all of these wars did not favor the invading side. So why are we concerned about Russia? Would it not be Russia more concerned if the war continues for long?
So yeah, you're right to bring up those examples, but I would be careful about those examples, because those examples are ones where the invading country was at a significant disadvantage in that there wasn't much political support for the conflict. Even in the USSR, we know that that was a deeply unpopular war, the invasion of Afghanistan. The Vietnam War clearly was unpopular in the United States. Over time, the effort in Afghanistan became unpopular in the United States. The invasion of Iraq and the occupation of Iraq became unpopular. We don't see that in Russia. We don't see the poll numbers turning against the Russian government. In fact, they're pretty solid. In some polls by independent pollsters, we actually see popularity for Putin increasing, not decreasing. So Russia's a bit different that way, and that's an important thing to point out. There's not a domestic opposition that is powerful enough to really put pressure on the government to leave this conflict. The other thing is that Putin is a leader whose political survival absolutely depends on, at a minimum, not losing in Ukraine, but possibly may depend on winning in Ukraine. He can't afford to leave. If he leaves, I think most of us who follow this closely think he's done for politically. That others in the Kremlin, other power centers in Russia will depose him. So he absolutely has to stick it out with this war. A U.S. president can say, okay, we're going to withdraw from Afghanistan, or we're going to withdraw from Vietnam. They may lose the next election as a consequence of that. But they're not about to be put in prison or executed. Think about what Vladimir Putin faces if he's deposed. He may very well be executed by his political opponents, whoever takes over. Russian politics is a pretty rough business. Look what happened to Prigozhin. I don't see him saying, okay, this just didn't work out, I'm going to leave. It's not something that makes any sense from his perspective.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for being guest in our show.
Sure. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a break and we'll join you back with the last segment of the program. Stay with us. Welcome back to the last segment of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, while we have been talking about Pakistan's economic outlook many times in this program, fact is that Pakistan's currency in its spate of 6 to 7 weeks have become one of the best performing currencies from being one of the worst performing currencies in the world. There is an entire turnaround, at least in the speculation of the investors, at least in all the things that identify the basic temperament or sentiment of the market. If you see Karachi Stock Exchange, the KC 100 index is hovering around 47,000. It has stayed consistent. If you look at the gold price, these are reversing. If you look at US dollars or other currencies, Pakistani rupee is appreciating against all odds. Dr. Khalid Mahmood is a leading expert on the subject, a famous economist from Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, who has joined us over Skype from Islamabad. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
The currency panorama has tilted on its head against all the speculations that had been made by the experts. From one of the worst performing, we are turning out to be one of the best performing currencies. What is happening?
Well, in fact, it was a puzzle, and I am also learning in this process. But this is my feeling that actually it is because of certain administrative, I would not say new measures, but strict control and compliance actually to the regulations which were earlier not that much considered of. I'll give you a quick example. We have got trade happening from Afghanistan and Iran, but nobody has considered ever that who's actually making the payments and how the channels are actually made. And that was also mentioned by our Minister Gohar Ejaz about 2 days back, that actually all the reference-based payments which were coming through the foreign exchange dealers were used to make those payments for against which we were buying actually the goods and services which were actually smuggled into Pakistan. So some kind of an administrative measures which were taken in terms of anti-smuggling, as well as having strict control on the foreign exchange companies. That has actually led to improvement in the overall foreign exchange business. Now, if you go to the foreign exchange companies, they would not be very easy or making transactions over the counter in that manner which they were doing earlier. So there is a strict compliance on already existing regulations which were set for the foreign exchange companies, as well as the State Bank has recently issued another circular in which they have invited now the banking companies also to become kind of foreign exchange companies of their own as well. So there is an element of competition in which it's not just now the foreign exchange companies which are going to deal with the over-the-counter transactions, but there are going to be banking companies also which are going to do that. And along with that, the government, not just the government, the army supported initiatives for the anti-smuggling drive has actually led to some kind of effective control on the currency which was used to finance for the smuggling operations. So primarily it appears that these are the reasons. But having said that, there is also investment coming in from or at least.
But Dr. Khalid, for the sake of comprehension of the viewers of this program, can you tell us how the Afghan trade was affecting or denting Pakistan's economy? Are you telling us that the Afghanis or the traders of Afghanistan were buying dollars from the open market of Pakistan and placing orders for Afghanistan that were coming in, and that is what was putting more pressure on the demand of dollars?
Actually, this is how it happens. The payments are not made through the banking channels. What happens, I'll give you a quick example. If our brothers sitting in Dubai, they are sending in remittance to Pakistan. What did he do? He would go to a foreign exchange dealer there, and through the Hawala or Hundi system, they are going to transfer money, which is going to be in PKR in Pakistan. But that actual amount remains in Dubai. Now, whatever LCs based or even otherwise exports which were destined towards Afghanistan is going to be paid by that money which is actually held in Dubai. So there was a process through which actually the foreign exchange which was supposed to be earned and remitted to Pakistan was going towards Afghanistan. But the story doesn't complete here. It was actually not Afghanistan. The transit trade or the smuggling which was coming from the Iranian border was due to land back again into Pakistan as well. So it was basically money used for buying imported commodities for Pakistan, but the channel was looked as the transit goods going to Afghanistan, or in other case, the goods which were transmitted to coming from the Iranian side. So this is what appears that most likely because what happens is that the market is driven by the expectations. And I'm sure that there was some speculative elements as well, because given the availability of such an enormous foreign exchange company setups through franchises and others available all across Pakistan, and as I've mentioned it in one of your last programs as well, that there seemed to be no reason that why would we have a foreign exchange company spread over all over Pakistan. It should be concentrated in major cities or at least close to the airports where the over-the-counter transactions where simple individuals which are going to go abroad or coming inside Pakistan would be exchanging money. So there was an element of speculative transactions as well, which now the people have actually stopped because of strict regulations, because it's not just a matter of buying. You have to, at the end of the day, encash them as well. So when they go for encashment, now the foreign exchange companies are saying, hey, sorry, we cannot do it because there is a surveillance system. If you go there, they're going to ask you for your ID card and other sorts of identification marks. So practically they were unable to make transactions. So all that combined had put a pressure on the foreign exchange markets, and there was an undue, I would suggest, increase in the rate which was there in the system, and that has now started to come down. And what we were expecting is that it is further going to slide down to around 260 within a couple of maybe 1 or 2 months.
Dr. Gold has been a historic haven for investors in the past as well. Any time of economic depressions have seen gold going up. In Pakistan, on the contrary, the gold is coming down. How do you justify that?
Well, again, the problem with gold is that it is a store of value for individuals which want to keep assets in pieces which are easily encashable. But at the same time, that's not something which we are producing by ourselves. It is basically imported. And legally speaking, nobody is allowed to import gold in Pakistan. So what happens is that it is coming through channels which are not legal. So therefore, we really don't know that what is the supply chain and from where it is actually coming in and going out, basically. So what I feel over time, what has happened is that one, to me, the purchasing power of people actually who were investing in this as a stock or store of value, or even as an ornament for their marriage ceremonies and others, actually their buying power has significantly reduced. This is, I think, one of the reasons because of which the market is slumming down. The second is, of course, the same reasons that over time, because of the administrative measures, there is a panic in all those secondary sources of investments which are not legal. So the people are a bit afraid. You must have seen in news and others that there was some breakings of houses in which cash was identified, although maybe it was legal or illegal, that's a separate issue. But there is a crackdown actually on those who are holding these as an asset, whether it's currency, dollars, or such minerals which are kept as store of value. So I believe that it's a kind of a market-based mechanism which is leading towards reduction in the prices because there is a reduction in demand. So therefore, there is going to be a gap in supply and demand leading towards that. This is what obviously comes as a reason. On the other hand, since this market, as I said, that it's not regulated, and we really don't have the statistics in terms of how much we have it stored in our capacities. Only the State Bank has it as a reservoir, but otherwise we really don't know that what's the capacity of the market. So prima facie, it is basically of the demand pressures which is leading towards reduction in the prices, and maybe it is also linked with the foreign exchange, since the foreign exchange, as I said, that it's not an open commodity to be imported. It is basically in negative list. So if the dollar's value is coming down in the open market, so therefore the price of the gold would proportionally or would also come down.
And amid all of what you have shared, amid all of what we have discussed, how do you forecast Pakistan's economic outlook over the next 1 year?
So I'll not go beyond 6 months, and this is something presently we also see in tandem with the current government setup. We are in a stagflation situation in which the inflation is not dying down, which is very unique in the sense that normally when the inflation shocks come in the economy, they die out after a certain point in time because it's the rate of change in prices. The level of prices have actually risen, but it is not coming down. On the other side, the economic activity has slowed down considerably. So we are in a situation, we are in a fix. But on top of that, I really don't understand that what kind of policy paradigm we are actually living in. You must have read it in the newspaper that the World Bank is asking us that we need to lower down the income tax slab for the salaried persons. And I was making a joke to one of my colleagues that the minimum wage currently is 35,000. So they are trying to par it with this, that anybody who's above the minimum wage, so that means he's just on the boundary, should be basically under the tax net. So the documentation drive and trying to get as much as resource extraction, as you must have seen that the FBR has also surpassed its target somehow, is really, I think, further choking down the economic activity. We have to basically now sit down, let some breathing air there be, and some positive policies should be there which can actually improve. But overall, the economy is now in a status quo mode in which it is not taking risky decisions. We don't also see that it is falling down. So there is a kind of I would say, stall in the expectations, which is going to remain for a couple of years, for a couple of time, until unless there is a major change. And by major change, we are seeing that the foreign exchange is coming down. If it considerably goes down, or if we see the bumper crops coming in, as the cotton is basically identified that this year we are going to have a very good harvest of that. So that can actually start pushing some positivity in the economy, because whenever the people hold back, after some time they start to again reinvest. So what I see is that after 3 or 4 months, gradually the economy is going to pick up. But for the time being, the same kind of a status quo would basically remain.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid, for being guest in our show.
Pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now joined by Sultan Ali Haider, who is an expert of political economy and brings in a very different perspective on these matters. Sultan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shabahat. It's always a pleasure being here.
Sultan, quickly, how the currency has started performing much better. You just heard what Dr. Khalid have said. What are your thoughts on it?
So you see, first of all, it has sudden rapid change cannot happen due to change in economic fundamentals, right? So Pakistan's economic fundamentals did not change overnight. The issue was related to purely a technical reason. The technical reason was that IMF had mandated in the last program that it just negotiated with the outgoing government, was that the differential between the official rate and the open market rate would not be as much, which meant that the government should not try to artificially curtail the rate of the dollar. Now, when that was, IMF insisted that should be implemented before Pakistan gets the next tranche. The government, you can say about 2 months back, 1.5 months back, it started to implement that. When that implementation started, the interbank rate started to catch up with the open market rate. Then speculators got in and the open market rate also tried to creep up. So that flow started to happen. With that flow, a lot of speculators got in. People started to buy and hold dollars, and also currency smuggling was also taking place. A lot of external factors in terms of Afghanistan, and other currency smuggling. Now, government about 1 month back, the government decided to take decisive action, and that is when the internal government was in place. So with the decisive action against hoarders, against currency smugglers, we saw a series of action around that. We have discussed that before. We have started to see a steady decline, and one is that decline is taking place, and a very good thing is that decline is taking place while the difference between open market interbank rate is not as much. As quoted by the finance minister recently, it is less than 1%. So that is the overall thing. And last one comment I would like to make on this exchange rate phenomenon over the last 1 month. Now we see that the economy is being managed by Dr. SHABAHAT. As a finance minister, she gives a lot of confidence to the market in general that some professional person, not with political views, and she's not a controversial person, she's a very highly respected intellectual. So she's leading the show. She has been state bank governor. So it gives confidence to people that things and our economy and finances are being managed well.
And what about gold, which has also started losing its value against Pakistani rupee in the market?
So you see, in terms of, it depends where you stand. So if you are holding a lot of gold in Pak rupees and you thought that, okay, my gold is valued that much, so maybe you feel bad about it. But from Pakistan, people who are buying gold, from that perspective in Pakistan, it's a very welcome news, because against the same Pakistani currency, now you can, the per 10 gram or per tola cost has significantly reduced. Again, that is due to twin factors. So one is rupee was appreciating in value, right? And gold is naturally priced in US dollar terms. And then there was certain drop in gold prices. So it was hovering around 1900 to 1950 mark. And it was maintaining that level for the previous 6 months. Suddenly, over the course of last month, it has dropped down, and now it is in the high 1700 range. So that twin factor has come in, and that has sort of, again, that's a very welcome thing in terms of buying power of the Pakistani currency. Because you see, in terms of Pakistani currency, if we stick to that, either you measure it in terms of dollars or you measure it in terms of gold. Gold was the traditional standard. So these are two very welcome news. And one comment that I have been hearing in the market is people do expect, in terms of the speculators, they do expect the slide of the dollar to go up to 240 marks, so between 200 250. I'm not quoting any economic models, but I'm quoting people who deal in currency and who take positions in currency due to their businesses. So they expect it to go to 200, 250 mark.
Importantly, Sultan, all the inputs that are used by the industry, that is petrol, that is diesel, that is gas, that is LPG, are going high. Inflation is on one of the all-time highest range, and also the fact that the electricity have become more expensive. How would this haunt the economic outlook, as exports are going to be the primary source of income of Pakistan in long term?
You see, I would say naturally I will give you purely from a business perspective, not as an economist. Purely from a business perspective, these are very much negative news, I would say, for the business and the industry, because your input costs are going up. Now, when businesses, their input costs go up, they directly pass it on to the consumer. They themselves, in an ideal scenario, do not get impacted by those high costs. But the problem becomes that their buyers or the consumers, they are not buying their goods or services. So the purchasing goes down. That is a negative impact. So that is where businesses start to feel pressure, because revenues are not coming in or enough sales are not happening. So for example, if there is a coffee shop and somebody would go in and have coffee in that coffee shop with friends and family, maybe 10 times in a month, maybe they would cut it down to 5 times a month, because they would be spending the same amount of money. A person driving a motorcycle or a car, they were spending 500 rupees or 1000 rupees to fuel, they would still be taking out the same banknote, especially in terms of the salary class. So it does create a lot of negative pressures. And another factor that I feel purely from a business or industry perspective is that when these prices go up, then cost of production goes up. Those are passed on to the consumer. It impacts the prices. When the prices get impacted, economists measure the inflation rate. Then the pressure again on the government is to keep the rates high, the CIBOR rate high, to match up to the inflation. So that's a negative spiral that usually countries get stuck in.
There was a news item, Mr. Sultan Ali Haider, which stated that banks have very little cover. If banks go default, the people will only get ₹500,000 of coverage. Is it a bad news for people holding account in Pakistan?
It is something like people becoming more aware of how the system actually operates. And this is not a new thing. I also recall maybe 2 to 3 years back. Again, there was this certain news item was shared, and there was a lot of discussion, and some of the people, they became aware that the coverage is up to 500,000 rupees. Now, this is a common phenomenon. It's not limited to Pakistan. Globally, this is how the banking sector operates. For example, in the US, after the 2008 crisis, by US standards, they had insured about up to $250,000. And I was just looking at some recent statistics after there was a Silicon Valley Bank crisis, which happened, and we covered that in one of your programs before. So once they looked at that, they said that 40% of the deposit is not insured in the US also. However, one thing to look at this in terms of deposit coverage, this says in case a bank fails and the central bank, which is in our central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan, it is unable to cover that gap and unable to protect the depositors, everything fails. And when everything fails, then this insurance money will come to the customers. Here, responsibility of the government is to protect all customers. 90 or about 92% of Pakistani customers, their deposits are less than 500,000 rupees. So 92% people are protected already in terms of bank accounts, right? So I don't think there's too much to worry about. Track record of State Bank of Pakistan is really good. The worst bank performing bank was KSB Bank, and KSB Banks, it was taken over by State Bank. It was sold to another bank, and no depositor lost a single rupee. So I think with Pakistani bank sector, we can be pretty confident.
Thank you very much, Sultan Ali Haider, for being guest on our show.
It's always a pleasure, Shabbat. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, as Sultan Ali Haider has pointed out, Pakistan's economy has started doing good, and these are the times when the economic managers should sit down and should chart out a strategy that Pakistan can maintain over a longer course of over a longer period of time, supplemented by the right courses of action. We'll join you next week with another program, and until then, Allah Hafiz.